One Heat Minute Productions presents Guide for the Film Fanatic, the podcast where we invite a guest to pick one movie from Danny Perry's seminal 1986 film reference book and talk to us about that movie. I'm your host, Jason Bailey, and across the mic and across the country from me is my co-host,
Michael Hull.
Our guest today, friends, is the chief film critic for Rolling Stone magazine. Heard of it? As well as a member of the New York Film Critics Circle and the National Society of Film Critics. Please welcome our friend and yours, Mr. David Fear. Hi, Dave.
Hey, guys. How you guys doing?
Great. Thank you so much for coming on. The first email I got...
I thought his name was pronounced Dav.
It's pronounced Davidstein.
Okay, that's what I thought. Thank you. Go ahead. Sorry.
The first email I got when we posted the first episode of this podcast was from you, David Fear. Do you recall what you told me in that email? The conversation we had over the internet.
It is the same thing that I have been saying about this book for nearly 40 years. So I want you guys to picture a 16-year-old David working in a mall, who would spend my lunch hours going to the local bookstore inside the mall and just perusing books. It's something I've always loved to do, and I would go straight to the film and TV book section and just look, and I come across something that says A Guide for the Film Fanatic by Danny Perry, an author I've never heard of. I grew up buying like the Leonard Maltin guides and those consumer guides that you would always get, and I already had a habit of checking off things that I'd seen or reading about stuff and being like, oh, this is, guy's a newspaper magnate and he dies and people try to figure out his life and there's a snow globe and a sled. This sounds interesting. Like,
sure.
You would constantly just kind of mark these things in your head. But I was a child of the 70s and 80s, so I was still very kind of cloistered in what I would see. And I pick up this book, and first off, it's already got boxes that you can check next to the titles. So I was like, sold.
Yes.
And I start reading through this, and I pick up a copy, and then I just start going through this thoroughly. This becomes my Bible, my Torah, my Quran. This is the thing that turns me on to so many films, and specifically international films and foreign language films that I've never heard of. And then I have just spent the last, close to 40 years actually, just trying to see every single thing that was in this book and going through it. It is no joke. People always say, oh, this movie changed my life, or this book changed my life, or this TV show changed my life. This book literally changed my life. It's part of the reason that I do what I do now. It turned me into somebody who liked a couple of different type of restaurants to every kind of international cuisine that I could shove into my maw. And God bless Danny Perry, and God bless him for this book, because it really is absolutely wonderful. Even though, and I think Michael will agree with me on this because I re-listened to the Godfather Part 2 episode today, some of these opinions are batshit. They're straight up batshit.
Some of them are. Yes, it's very true.
But that's what makes it good. I mean,
that's what makes it great.
That is something that, like, I didn't really sort of know until we've gotten into this and really talking to everybody about it, is how often it's just sort of like, what is he even talking about? And then that's the best conversation for the next 30 minutes. Right. And half the time we come around to his point. I don't know where he's at with this Al Pacino thing in Godfather, but a lot of times we end up coming around. Yeah.
So Dave, how many would you, ballpark estimate of the, 1,600 plus must-see movies that make up the bulk of the book, that actually have the capsules, etc.? Roughly how many of those have you seen since this book first made itself known to you 40 years ago?
I think of the 1,600 films, and to be fair, I'm not counting the porn films that he's got in here, so It's not like I'm trying to chase down Pretty Peaches. No offense to Desiree Cousteau, but
sure.
I've said out of the 1,600, I've probably got about 20 left.
Wow.
Yeah, a couple of these things are hard to find, and a couple I've found and have either DVDs or MP4s sitting to the side that I need to Need to catch up. There's only so many hours in the day, and sometimes you can't get around to Antonio de Mortes. So,
right, yeah, right. And sometimes you have like a different movie that your job is making you watch. So, I feel you on that. But
that's such a Film Fanatic answer, man. I mean,
yes,
that's just such a like. First of all, I was already making lists. All of you guys, you can't have your job unless you have that story. That's that's another thing we've sort of figured out.
Yeah,
but also like it's once you've made it through 800 of these films, 400 of these films. I mean, this selection is so eclectic and thoughtful, and the way he describes them, there's so much to sort of pull apart inside of there. I feel like you're already sort of not overeducated, but more educated than most. Without needing to make it to having 20 films left. The book's already had its impact.
I mean, I've been called many things with the prefix over, for sure. Educated is not usually one of them. It's usually followed by rated or wrought. But yeah, I mean, my one regret, I think I've gone through 4 copies of the book now. And I usually try to keep a spare because you never know. Like if I find a copy someplace, I'll just pick it up because you never really know where you're going to find another copy. And I've literally worn them down to the point where the spine just kind of falls apart.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, it's just there's something about the eclectic nature of it, and there's something about the way that he really is kind of it was a great introduction to a lot of regional cinemas, but then a lot of great introduction to like leveling the playing field in terms of like B movies and genres. Like this sounds silly to say now, but when you're a 16-year-old kid in the 80s and you're like who's Russ Myers? And then when you start watching these Russ Myers films, you're like, oh, this counts as movies too. People have to remember that this book predates Tarantino.
Right.
And there's a lot of wonderful things you can say about Tarantino, and there's a lot of not so wonderful things you can say about Tarantino in terms of his filmmaking and his opinionating and all of that. But one of the great things he did was he really reintroduced the whole notion of genre movies being worthy of people's time and worthy of cinephiles' time.
Yep.
And if you were around in the early 90s and suddenly you were like, there are all these other spaghetti westerns or these Hong Kong action films or these Shaw Brothers wuxia films, like these were legitimate things to discuss and talk about and enjoy. And Danny Perry did that for me back in the late 80s. My only real regret about the book, the only issue that I have with it, to be honest, is that it stops at 86. And there's been many times where I've thought to myself, Mr. Perry, I have a checkbook. But
what would it take to underwrite?
Yeah, exactly.
What would it take to underwrite this expansion?
GoFundMe campaigns, like, please. I'm tapping my vein. I'm tying off.
Yeah.
Like, just give me that 10 cc's of that sweet stuff, Danny P.
Well, that's awesome. Well, it is. I mean, we love talking to you. We love having you on the shows to begin with. But to talk to someone who really is such an enthusiast of this book, who it made such an impact on, is a real treat. So then the question became, okay, if I'm handing the list to somebody who's, seen 200, well, that's tough enough for them to pick one movie to talk about for an hour. When you're talking about someone who's seen all but 20, that's a tall task. So David Fear, what film did you select for us to discuss today?
Yeah, I have to admit this was remarkably tough. Because there were a lot of you guys have already covered a lot of wonderful movies. There were one or two that I every week when the new episode would get released, and I would get an email saying like, hey, there's something new on the site. There were once or twice I'd be like, oh man, somebody already picked that film. I can't wait to hear him talk about it. But I'm bummed that if I ever get asked, I can't pick it. And then when you did say, hey, come on the show, and I was looking through the spreadsheet and my book. It really was this sort of thing of like, well, do I pick something that's a little less known and obscure, like It's in the Bag, which is this absolutely wonderful comedy starring Fred Allen, who used to be a big deal. He was around during Jack Benny's time, and he was kind of like this. They were set up this sort of fake rivalry between him and Benny. Yep. And people still talk about Jack Benny all the time, but they don't talk about Fred Allen. And this was the one big movie he made, and it's fucking amazing.
Yep.
Or do you go with something huge like you'd done The Godfather Part Two, but I don't think you'd done The Godfather.
Right.
A couple of other things where it's like 2001, Strange Love, movies that I just love and know back and forth and have spoken about for decades. And then it suddenly occurred to me that no one had picked Young Frankenstein, which would give us an opportunity to talk about universal horror and Mel Brooks and the idea of parody and how comedies require care in order to be timeless, even when they're dated or supposedly seem like they might be dated. And almost as importantly, it gave me a chance to wax poetic about 1974, which I know you guys have covered on the Best Year podcast, but still remains to me the single most significant and awe-inspiring and jaw-dropping year for American movies outside of 1939. And I will go to the mat with that. No offense, 1999 or 2007, both great years. 1954, solid. But let me tell you something, man. 74, like Chinatown, The Godfather Part 2, The Conversation, The Parallax View, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Coffee, which I think is the best blaxploitation movie of the bunch, Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3, The Longest Yard, Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia, California Split, Phantom of the Paradise, Death Wish. I think Foxy Brown is also that there. Oh, no, maybe Foxy Brown is 74 and Coffee's earlier. The Sugarland Express, Caged Heat, Dark Star, Lenny, Daisy Miller, which, yes, I know, but Daisy Miller. The Gambler, yes. Phase 4. Phase 4 was also a film I almost picked. That Saul Bass thing is great, but I think it's just in the index. Zardos, A Woman Under the Influence, and goddamn it, not one but two Mel Brooks masterpieces. You get Blazing Saddles and Young Frankenstein in the same year. That's insane.
Yes. Yes.
There's other good movies, but you don't actually need any other movies. Those could just be the movies that you have for the rest of your life, and you would be fine. You'd be fine.
Forget the 22 movies I just named. 1974 is one of the best years for Hollywood because Blazing Saddles and Young Frankenstein.
So let's take a look at the Young Frankenstein trailer. There it is. There he is. I love that, and we may get into this a little bit, that this is one of the few Mel Brooks movies in which he does not appear in a significant role. And the fact then, though, that when you watch the trailers, the TV spots, and the radio ads, they're all totally dominated, narrated by Mel Brooks. He was like, if I'm not going to be in the movie, I'm going to promote the movie. So he does these great, funny radio ads and the trailers here, which we see. Here's our incredible cast. Mr. Wilder, Mr. Feldman, Mr. Boyle, Cloris fucking Leachman, Madeline Kahn as Elizabeth, and Terry Garr, who's not in the trailer, and Gene Hackman, of course, is not in the trailer as well. Oh, there's Kenny Mars. Yeah, I mean, they showed you exactly what you were getting here. Black and white, Young Frankenstein, produced by Michael Grosskopf, directed by Mel Brooks, of course. Young Frankenstein was the third collaboration between director Mel Brooks and star Gene Wilder, who first teamed for Brooks' The Producers in 1968. Wilder stepped into the role of the Waco Kid in Brooks' Blazing Saddles at the last minute when the original actor, Gig Young, showed up in an alcoholic stupor and had to be replaced. While they were making that film, Wilder told Brooks about a script he was working on about Victor Frankenstein's grandson. They decided to collaborate on the screenplay. Wilder would star while Brooks would direct, and per Wilder's request, not appear in a major role. The film would reunite Brooks and Wilder with Blazing Saddles co-star Madeline Kahn and The Producers co-star Kenneth Mars. It would also mark their first collaborations with Marty Feldman and Cloris Leachman, and would include an unbilled appearance by Gene Hackman and one of the first major roles for Terry Garr. Garr and Hackman, by the way, also co-starred in the aforementioned The Conversation that same magical year of 1974. All right, Mike, what does Danny Perry say about Young Frankenstein in Guide for the Film Fanatic?
This spoof of Universal's 1931 version of Frankenstein is the only Mel Brooks film that almost everyone likes.
Fair.
For a change, Brooks remains tasteful throughout.
Coming in hot.
Keeps his actors under reasonable control. This is helped by his limiting his own appearance to a mere cameo. Maintains the picture's tone by including only one burlesque interlude. Frankenstein and the monster perform a hilarious rendition of Puttin' on the Ritz. And holds that until nearly the end, so it won't be intrusive. And while the humor is outrageous, it is subtly played. Mm-hmm. Most important is that Brooks shows a knowledge and affection for both Frankenstein and the horror genre that he would not display for the Western in Blazing Saddles. The use of lab props from the 1931 movie, the use of black and white film, and an atmospheric score by John Morris contribute greatly to Brooks's attempt to recapture the ambiance of the old Universal horror pictures. Wild-eyed Gene Wilder as the Mad Baron, Peter Boyle as the monster, Marty Feldman as the hunchbacked Igor, Madeline Kahn as the Baron's fiancée, Cloris Leachman as the weird housekeeper, and Terry Garr as a lab assistant who displays a great deal of cleavage, do justice to the clever Brooks Wilder script. The highlight is a scene in which Boyle visits bearded blind man Gene Hackman, a brilliant takeoff of the memorable maudlin scene in Bride of Frankenstein. Also with Kenneth Mars, Richard Hayden. Of course that's Danny Perry's favorite scene in the movie. Of course it is. That makes so much sense.
Of course,
I'm not saying he's wrong.
He's going to mention Terry Garr's cleavage. Of course he is.
Yes. I mean, it's certainly a takeaway. All right. So where does your history with Young Frankenstein start, Dave Fear? When did you first see this movie, and what is your sort of your life with it?
Well, it's funny. So I grew up obsessed with movie ephemera as much as the movies themselves. Like, so the trailer, whenever a trailer would come on TV, I would run to the TV and watch it, and I would look through our local newspaper and kind of stare at the posters, and so Blazing Saddles was one of those films where every time I would see the poster, I would just be like, what is this? And it seemed, even the poster itself seemed hilarious. And I saw this is Blazing Saddles, which I'd seen before I'd seen Young Frankenstein. And for years, it was the kind of thing that my parents would talk about how funny this film was. Their friends would talk about how funny the film was. And it was this thing that I was determined to see, and then finally saw it and thought it was hilarious because, who doesn't love highbrow jokes mixed with the greatest fart scene of in cinema history. So I already started to kind of know who Mel Brooks was, and then while I was doing that, I was also a kid who loved monster movies and would stay up late whenever the late show. I grew up in the Bay Area, and there was a show called Creature Features by this guy, hosted by a guy named Bob Wilkins.
Yes,
he's amazing. He would show like all types of old horror films, Japanese horror films, Hammer films, ridiculous outer space alien invasion films, and a lot of the Universal horror canon. So I knew all those films, and then whenever they would come on, especially around Halloween, like I go out trick or treating and make sure I was home by 9, and then just watch those monster movies all night. So it was these kind of parallel tracks where I was already familiar with those movies and wanting to see as many Mel Brooks films as I could. A friend of mine had a videotape of Silent Movie, and I was like, it's the guy who did Blazing Saddles, and we would watch that constantly and stuff. But still, Young Frankenstein was one of those movies where, again, you'd see the poster, and it looked funny. I loved Gene Wilder. I was like, this has to be an amazing film. And then finally caught up with it and just fell in love with it because it kind of hit my two nerd passions as a kid, which was, outrageous, gross out comedy. I saw it at the end of the 70s, actually. So at that point, I'd already been kind of weaned on, the SNL films that were coming out, like Animal House and Stripes and that kind of stuff.
Sure.
And, like the late 70s, early 80s when I first saw it. And then over the years, I would just keep going back to it. I actually would argue that Blazing Saddles is a funnier comedy. It's a better comedy. It's a more pertinent comedy. It's actually a really, it's funny. You go back to it and it's a really solid movie. It has a solid foundation for a parody of Westerns that's also kind of taking on a lot of the social and racial stuff of the time. But Young Frankenstein to me is I think, a better movie. There's a real care that was taken in how he's sort of sending these films up. And this idea that you could parody something with affection and that you could get it was actually funnier if you got it as close to possible as the real thing, would enhance the jokes and enhance the comedy and just enhance the movie overall, was, you know, mind-blowing to an 11-year-old. And it warped me. It warped me in the best possible way.
That's awesome. Yeah. See, I don't have a clear memory of the first time I saw it, because this is one of those movies that has just always been in my life. Like, my dad, who raised me, loved Mel Brooks, loved he had all of them on tape. I think this one was probably his favorite. So I just have vague memories of it just kind of always being on. You know, and of him and my uncles like quoting it to each other and saying, you know, Frau Blucher, you know, and all of the sort of bits that they would just do. So what was wild for me, the sort of the inverse of the experience that you're talking about, is I saw this movie way before I saw anything that was parodying.
Finding out fancy people liked it, and like smart movie people liked it, was like, oh, what, really?
Yeah.
Yes, sorry.
I hadn't seen any of the Universal horror movies. I hadn't seen, you know, I was vaguely sort of, you see like the stills of, you know, of Bela Lugosi, you know, or Boris Karloff, but I hadn't seen any of those movies until late teens, early 20s. So what's wild then is to see those movies and finally get jokes that you've been seeing in a movie that you've seen since you were a little kid, but that also speaks so well to how funny and approachable, accessible is the better word, this movie is, that you don't have to know what they're sending up for it still to be uproariously funny, affectionate, interesting, so forth and so on. I think over the years, Dave, I've come to sort of a similar conclusion to what you're talking about. Blazing Saddles is his funniest movie, but this is his best directed movie. This is his most accomplished achievement as a filmmaker. And it is easy to just sort of fall back to the argument of, well, because it's, you know, he's restrained and it's his most mature and he's that disciplined to the time period and the style and so forth and so on. But you know what? That's not an easy thing to do, what he did, to so faithfully match that style and then to be really funny on top of that. Mike, what's your history with this one?
Well, I mean, similar to it, like, this is my mom's favorite movie, like, bar none. So
favorite,
absolute out of every movie ever made. So like, we did Led Zeppelin, Song Remains the Same. I don't know how in what order these things get released, but last week we did Led Zeppelin, which, like, literally in the womb. And, you know, so now, I mean, I don't even, like you said, I don't remember when, I had seen this before well, I can tell you, because it's how video stores work. Once upon a, you know how you can go to a video store and rent a VCR because nobody has them?
Yeah.
That's how they started too. I know that they that's a recent thing because nobody has them now, but they used to do that also in the beginning when nobody had them. Right. And I mean, I remember renting a VCR and this movie, and Johnny Five is Alive.
Short Circuit.
Thank you. Short Circuit. So, like, you know, sort of that era, you know, and this is one of the first, when you could rent a VCR before we actually had one. This is one of the very first things that we brought home, and it was specifically because it was her favorite movie.
Wow.
You know, and then so then I didn't watch it for a long time because it was like, not because it was my mom's favorite movie, just because it's, you know, this like thing from the 70s or whatever. Like, by the time I realized Gene Hackman was in this movie, you know what I mean? Like, I had already seen all the other Gene Hackman things. Right. And then at some point the movie's just on and I'm like, get out of here. Is that Gene Hackman? Like, I'm having that sort of like reverse impact, like you're saying. And then finding out that fancy movie people liked it. Yeah. And that, you know, that it had all those references and all those things, you know, sort of, I didn't know any of that until later. And it was like, it was weird. It was like, you know, whatever. I don't know. Whatever dumb food you thought nobody ate. And then you grow up and you see it in the New York Times. And you're like, what is this shit?
Right.
You know?
Right. So, you know, it's timely that we're to talk about it because they just debuted this 2-part bio documentary. I haven't seen it yet. I've heard it's great. He put out a memoir a couple years ago, which specifically highly recommend listening to the audiobook, because he of course reads it and still giggles at the stories as he's telling them. But the thing that sort of was surprising to me as I've learned more of sort of the details of his biography as opposed to the broad strokes was the realization that this style that he works in, when you say Mel Brooks to just about anybody who knows anything about movies, they're like, yes, he is the spoof guy. Like, he spent his career satirizing specific genres in these extremely funny movies and this mix of highbrow, lowbrow, and, Borscht Belt. It's all pretty predetermined. What I didn't realize until I sort of did more research into him was that that was kind of something he stumbled into, that this was not like he made a conscious decision the way that maybe like Zucker did, to be like, this is the kind of movie I'm going to make. This is the style I'm going to work in, yada, yada, yada. The first two movies he directs are The Producers and The 12 Chairs, both of which are extremely funny, but neither of which are parodies of anything. The 12 Chairs, Producers is a big hit. The 12 Chairs is not, even though it's a great movie that I always try to recommend to people. And he came on to Blazing Saddles as a director for hire, basically. That it was not a project that he had originated. He had not set out to say, I'm going to make a Western spoof. He was brought on to direct an existing script by Andrew Bergman, who had done, I think, The In-Laws either right before or right after that, went on to write Fletch and a few other things. And they brought him in to direct that movie. And he said, this is a solid start for a script. Let me put together your show of shows style writer's room. Let me bring in comedy writers. Let me bring in Richard Pryor, and we'll beat this script into something that's unstoppable. And then that movie was a big hit. Then while he's making that movie, he has this interaction with Gene Wilder that I mentioned in the introduction. And then they end up making this spoof of 30s monsters movies. But you see how it just sort of fell into place for him. It wasn't something that he sort of set out to do. And I think that's fascinating because he clearly has such a facility for it. He's so good at it. But the fact that it was just sort of circumstances that put him there, I think is really fascinating.
Well, and the documentary, first off, everybody should see the two-part documentary, the Judd Apatow directed one. It's really, really good. And
great.
Even though, it covers a lot of ground that people have covered in the past in terms of Mel Brooks, life and movies, it's a great push to get you to rewatch a lot of that stuff, because it certainly had me rewatching a lot of things. But it also is a great reminder that by the time he got around to making Young Frankenstein, he was on the fourth iteration of a career in show business.
Wow.
He essentially starts out in the writer's room of your show of shows with Sid Caesar, right, and then kind of sticks with him, even though, and it gets into this in the film, that he was pushing Sid Caesar to start doing movies that he wanted to direct him in. And Sid Caesar was like, kid, they're giving me golden handcuffs here. They're going to keep paying me more and more to do the show. And Brooks stuck with him. And then didn't know what he was going to do after that, looked for a job, couldn't figure out what he wanted to do, came up with Get Smart. No, actually, sorry, I've skipped a step. He comes up with the 2,000-Year-Old Man with Carl Reiner.
Right,
and then those records, once they start turning what's essentially a party trick into this recording career, that becomes a whole other thing for him. And then looking for a job, doesn't know what he's going to do. He's never going to make it. Is my career over? Comes up with Get Smart beside Buck Henry. That's a huge hit for a long time. And then still doesn't know what he wants to do. He does The Producers, which the doc reminds you, was not a hit right away. People didn't know what to make of it. It wasn't until Peter Sellers took out a full-page ad, and I think it was Variety, where it kind of spurred people to go, and eventually it caught on, and then he won an Oscar for it for Best Screenplay. And then, he does The 12 Chairs, and it kind of flops. And, The Producers is this incredible satire that's really pushing a lot of buttons and, pushing a lot of envelopes at the time. Like, I think he made it in, 66 or 67? And Auschwitz had been liberated in 45. I mean, that's 20 years. Like, and you're already making jokes about this.
Yeah.
And then he does The 12 Chairs, which is this, wonderful, very wry, but totally flopped, Russian lit comedy. and he doesn't know what he's going to do. And then, yeah, once he does Blazing Saddles and it becomes this huge thing, he becomes the parody guy. And it's really only like Blazing Saddles is a great send up of westerns, but it's also got a lot of other things going on.
Right.
Young Frankenstein is really a straight up send up of that genre. And again, this is 1974. Like, these films, you couldn't go and rent them in a video store.
Right.
There were no video stores in 1974, at least not
Right.
for your average punters out there. Like,
Right.
they would, I'm sure they showed them in revival theaters, or the kind of rep circuit. But
most people saw them the way you saw them. Most
Yeah.
people saw them on those like late night costumed host horror shows.
yeah, there's a whole generation of filmmakers that I like to call the sons of Forrest Ackerman, which is that they all kind of like came up
Yep.
in that kind of famous Monsters of Filmland obsession, and
Absolutely.
And saw all those movies on the Late Late Show, and
Yeah.
fell in love with them. And so people were familiar with them, even if they were like 3 generations removed from the mainstream audiences seeing them in theaters. But it was fluent enough that he could craft an entire comedy
Right.
around it and have people come, even ones that weren't dyed in the wool film nerds.
Yep. Yep. Well, talk to me then, as someone who is well versed in those movies, about the sort of the because what really is striking are the pains that he goes through, the trouble he takes to really make it look and feel like a Universal horror movie. Frankly, trouble he clearly didn't have to go to. Like you say, he didn't go to that kind of trouble on Blazing Saddles. He wasn't trying to ape the look and the style of, a John Ford or a Howard Hawks Western, but he does that here. What specifically, aside from sort of obvious things like black and white photography, is he doing to sort of tie the film aesthetically to the movies that he's sending up?
Yeah, so there's a phrase called Hollywood Gothic. It was coined by, I think, David J. Skal, who's written
That's
extensively.
a great writer. Yeah.
Yeah, he's written a lot about Todd Browning and that whole era of Universal horror, and he had a great book on Dracula, how it kind of goes from page to screen, or page to stage to screen.
Right.
And it's really this very specific aesthetic that the Universal horror films kind of codify. It's these creepy castles, these very gothic, rural 18th century Bavarian or Eastern European landscapes. The villagers in town who know that there's some weird thing happening up in that castle up there where the lights are going on, or the occupant only comes out at night. Lots of cobwebs and shadows, and just a general sense of kind of spookiness, but a very specific regional spookiness.
Right.
And Mel Brooks gets it into his head, despite the studio's protestations and having to move studios, in fact, because one of them didn't want to do it black and white. The original didn't want to go with his vision or his budget. He had this idea that it would actually be funnier to tell this story if he replicated that Hollywood Gothic aesthetic to as close as he possibly could. And that started with black and white cinematography, which is, it's stunning. Hold on for a second.
Gorgeous movie.
Yeah, Gerald Hirschfeld.
Gerald
Oh my
Hirschfeld.
God.
Who I mean was like this was not like a comedy guy typically. Like his filmography, he did Failsafe for Sidney Lumet. Yeah. Hello. He did The Incident, which is one that we saw for Fun City Cinema. He shot Cotton Comes to Harlem. He did Diary of a Mad Housewife and a whole bunch of Frank Perry movies. This was like a real deal, not a bullshitter. Like, this was a real cinematographer, and he shoots the shit out of this movie. It's gorgeous.
Yes, it looks great. The score by John Morris really gets that kind of like, it's a very great old Hollywood style score on its own, but then it also is like taking bits and pieces from those scores in the original Universal horror films that are absolutely amazing. Dale Hennessy's production design replicates the kind of spooky castle, sparking lab kind of thing. I can't remember
Special
the
thanks Special thanks to Kenneth Strickfaden for original Frankenstein laboratory equipment. That
So
shit
you
is
re-
in the opening credits. That
Those
is
welding
not.
goggles.
Yeah.
That is. He is not relegating that thank you to a thank you at the closing crawl. That's in the opening credits.
The opening credits,
Like-
and I'm so glad you remembered the name because I could not forget it. I think he was a collector that just had a lot of that original, those original props, all that whole lab set, basically in his garage. And Brooks found him and was like, "Can we use this for the film I'm trying to make?" And oh my God, it makes such a huge difference. And it's funny too because there's everybody remembers the broad jokes, but having rewatched it a couple of times in the last few weeks, partially because I'd seen the Mel Brooks doc and just wanted to go back to it, and partially to prep for this, there's all these little small jokes that he's throwing in there that are these nice little tweaks on those old horror films, but you don't necessarily need to have seen it. Like I've seen this movie a dozen times, and it was only the last time I saw it where I realized that when Cloris Leachman, when Frau Buchauer meets him at the door, she has this elaborate candelabra in her hand, and none of them are lit. It's this throwaway sight
I've never
gag.
noticed. Never noticed.
Me neither. And I was just like,
That's great.
Holy shit, what? And then went to the commentary track, and sure enough, he's like, yeah, none of those, even the commentary track, he's like, yeah, no, those candles are lit. And you're just like, oh my God, it's so incredibly funny.
That's great. Yeah, just little, even editing things that he does. The edit when he the two beats that they wait to cut back to Gene Wilder before he says, "Now listen to me very carefully," like that they start the line with him off camera makes the bit 50 times funnier. There's all sorts of those little subtle touches in addition to, like you say, all of the broad stuff. I'm really glad you mentioned John Morris too, because I feel like John Morris is kind of like the secret sauce to this period for Brooks. Like he does all the scores to all, composes a lot of the songs, like composes the music for the producers, so forth and so on. What's great about his music in this is that it both serves the purpose of the satire. It sounds like a 30s Universal horror movie, but then it's kind of beautiful in its own right. Like the monsters theme, the that calms him, is like legit gorgeous piece of music that's genuinely like evocative and sort of moving. And for a composer to be able to do all of those things simultaneously is really kind of incredible, I think.
And have it add to the comedy as opposed to making it somber or puncturing the kind of, I guess you call it the comic bubble that is around most of these types of films in order to kind of keep the funny in from leaking out. It's just it's amazing.
All right, so we have to talk a bit about the genius that is Mr. Gene Wilder, who, first of all, I mean, came up with the idea, co-wrote the screenplay. It's a brilliant screenplay, and it's, I think sometimes Brooks gets kind of too much credit for how great that screenplay is, but Wilder was a hell of a good writer. But God, this is one of the great comedy performances of all time. Like, I think Gene Wilder should have been up for Best Actor that year. And you talked about what a stacked group of actors we were looking at that year. It is such inspired manic energy, which was something that he did very well, but I don't know that he ever did as well as he did right here.
Yeah, the use of volume alone in those lines. First off, he's got incredible timing.
Yes.
And the way that he takes a pause when the young student asks, "Aren't you related to that Frankenstein, his experiment and stuff?" And he goes, he was cuckoo. And just milks the pause so beautifully. Yes. Or then later in that scene when he goes into this rant and uproar, the way he says, my uncle's students were doo-doo, like, just, and then is in this manic just rant and raving, and then stabs himself in the leg with a scalpel, and doesn't scream, doesn't go into a manic thing. It's almost like the coyote when he runs off the cliff, and it takes him 5 seconds to realize there's no ground underneath him, right. And then he gracefully crosses his legs and sits there and doesn't say anything for a second and then says, "Class is over." With this strain in his voice as he's trying to
Right.
deal with this pain that's he's just
Right.
self-inflicted. Oh my God, it's hilarious. And that's just
Yeah.
one scene. I mean, it's probably my second favorite comic performance of just about all time because
Yeah.
it's so he not only understands the assignment, he's just so dialed into the rhythms of that film, and he
Mm-hmm.
knows exactly when to go manic and exactly when to go calm, and
Yep.
he's very generous. He knows when to like not step on somebody else's line or when to kind
Mm-hmm.
of milk a pause so that the whole scene becomes funny. Some of his reactions in this movie are absolutely phenomenal. He's
To
got a nice
Terry
soft shoe.
Garr specifically, some of the Terry Garr takes to
Yes.
Terry Garr are sort of incredible. But yes, and the putting on the Ritz number, definitely.
Yes, yeah, yeah. And the only reason I say that it's my second favorite comic performance of all time is because Peter Boyle's creature occupies that first space. There are so many great reaction shots in this. There are so
Yes.
many grace notes that he throws in here. There are so many little things that he's doing that amplify the comedy. I'm sure we're going to talk about the hermit scene in depth because Gene Hackman and Peter Boyle are so good in it. But there's a moment where he's poured the wine for him and he's finally going to take a sip of it, and then he stops him. The Gene Hackman stops Peter Boyle from sipping so they can do a toast, and he violently toasts and breaks the mug in his hand. And the reaction shot that Peter Boyle does after that, where he just stops and goes, without
Yes.
breaking character, with making it seem perfectly seamless, like, oh God, it's so
Yes.
good. It's so
Yeah.
fucking good.
Yeah. Well, and
Out of
one of
all the movies ever, the bit where the arm is hanging out of the coffin and the cop shows up and he's like standing there pretending like that's his arm. There's the profile shot with the arm in the foreground where he turns away from the cop and he's picking at the thumbnail on the arm, and he's pretending like it's his. That single shot, that might be the single sight gag that I laugh at most out of every movie ever. Like every time I see it, I obviously know what's coming.
Yes.
Every time I see it, including like 2 hours ago.
yes.
Out loud, laugh, funniest thing.
Yes.
But it's little details like that I mean, again, like Brooks has assembled a hell of a cast here who know what they're doing. Some of which he's collaborated for the first time, others of which they're already kind of part of his growing rep company.
Right.
But just the little decisions that they're making, or the way they hold on a line, or the little bits of business that they're doing. Madeline Kahn too. Madeline Kahn's got a bunch of the scene where her and she's saying goodbye to Gene Wilder at the train station.
Yes.
It's just filled with these little bits of business that are
Yes.
so hilarious. But you're right, that scene where he's picking his nail in the thing, it just oh God, it just gilds the lily for that joke in the best possible way.
Yes. Well, and one of the things, I'm glad you mentioned Madeline Kahn, because I think one of the things that really struck me on this last viewing, maybe for the first time, was that, we tend to think of, for good reason, you could look at the data of screen comedy as kind of being a boys club, and one of the things that I think is really terrific about Brooks in general, but especially in this movie, is that he's not writing women who are nags, who are props, who are eye candy alone. Like, you have 3 inspired female comic characters in this movie, and all 3 of these actresses are incredible and are doing wildly different, insane things in all 3 of those roles. Obviously, you mentioned Madeline Kahn, who one of the actual geniuses of the 20th century. Leachman is just utterly unhinged, and I love the fact that, like, even first time out of the gate, he knew that he could just turn her loose, and then from then on, whenever they worked together, he knew he could do that again. And I love that, Nurse Diesel in High Anxiety is basically like Frau Blucher turned up 3 more notches. And then Terry Garr, who is so appealing and so sexy, but her accent is uproarious. and her timing is impeccable, and she takes what could have been a kind of nothing eye candy role and makes her funny and interesting and memorable. And that there's that kind of depth to all of the characters, not just Dr. Frankenstein and the creature, I think is really, it's commendable, but it also speaks to like how well throughout his career, Brooks was very much about, okay, who is the funniest person I know, and how can they be as funny in this as they've ever been, if that makes any sense.
It makes a lot of sense. And yes, this is a great ensemble comedy.
Yes.
It's very easy to think of it as a Gene Wilder joint, which it is, or it's very easy to think of, it's Gene Wilder and Marty Feldman and then a bunch of other people who are being funny, which
Right.
yes, but like it's very much an ensemble comedy. There's a moment in the Judd Apatow doc where it's an interview, it's an archival interview with Wilder where he's talking about, I guess somebody asks him why they don't work together anymore. And I think Brooks is in the room. I think this is the interview. There's an interview in there where someone's interviewing Gene Wilder, and you can hear Brooks yelling punchlines from off screen, and just kind of generally being a hilarious
Right.
nuisance. And
Right.
they ask him why don't you work with him anymore? And he said he started writing scripts for himself and stopped writing scripts for me. And it's one of those things where, like, I think silent movies are uproarious, and I have a special place for it in my heart because it was one of the very earliest of his movies that I saw. Conceptually, I think it's, genius. High Anxiety, I was also a big Hitchcock fan growing up.
Sure,
So by the time
sure.
I saw High Anxiety and caught up with it in the mid 80s, like I'd already seen a lot of those films as a young teen. So like, twice as funny, but also just a really great comedy. But I think you do lose something. I think you lose something when it starts becoming a Mel Brooks production and no longer a comedy starring the Mel Brooks company of players, if you will.
No, I'm so glad you brought this up because I've always sort of been saddened by the fact that yes, it's their third collaboration. It was also their last collaboration. And like, why did they not continue to be one of the great, director actor pairings? I did find a little bit when I was doing the research for this that apparently there was a little bit of a dispute when the movie was completed and it was coming out, where in the advertising, Brooks's direction was being pushed and in a way and Wilder's screenplay contributions were being kind of downplayed, and there were sort of legalities in terms of like size of things and billing and stuff like that had not been abided by, and that Wilder's team had to be like, hey, he co-wrote this is his movie too. And I wondered if that sort of caused some bad blood. But as much as I love High Anxiety, and High Anxiety is twice as good if Gene Wilder's playing that leading role instead of Brooks. The Adventure of Sherlock Holmes' Smarter Brother is a very funny movie with Gene Wilder and Madeline Kahn and Marty Feldman like in the leads. It's twice as good a movie if Mel Brooks directs it. And
I would
so
say the same thing about The World's Greatest Lover as well.
Yes. And so like you see, they had these separate careers after this, kind of still playing in the same field and so forth, and they made good movies, but none of them are as good as the movies that they made together. And I kind of wish we could have seen that version of those careers. Okay, let's take a quick break, and then we will talk about the movie's release and reception. Friends, let's talk about the release and reception of Young Frankenstein, which opened in New York on December 15th, 1974. Also opening that weekend, The Towering Inferno, F for Fake, Emmanuel, and a little picture called The Godfather Part 2. So that was a good fucking weekend to go see movies.
Wow.
Just new releases alone, you're set. But also showing in New York on that day, Airport 1975, Earthquake, A Woman Under the Influence, Murder on the Orient Express, The Gambler, The Phantom of Liberty, Amarcord, That's Entertainment, The Night Porter, Flesh Gordon, Death Wish, The Trial of Billy Jack, Law and Disorder, Lenny, Our Friend Gene Wilder in The Little Prince, and, wait for it, The Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3. Mike, what were the news headlines?
You don't
on
need
that
any other
day?
movies.
You don't.
You don't need any other movies. You can just stick
Fine.
with 1974
Ever.
and you're good. You're covering all the movies.
Yes.
Ridiculous.
What are the news headlines on that day, December 15, 74?
Number 15.
December 14, excuse me.
Okay, I was like, oh no!
No, you're good. All
I
right.
got the wrong headlines. Okay, December 14, 1974. And there is a significant article on a research project at Harvard looking into people who have an extra sex chromosome. So like XYY instead of XY or XX, for instance, right? So there's a protest going on, and the scientists at Harvard are having to defend themselves and their research. Do you have any idea why people were protesting this chromosome research?
Why is that?
There was an idea that boys with a double male chromosome were inclined to criminality, and the people protesting the story were worried that they would be unfairly labeled.
Okay.
Can you imagine if you heard that story now? It would be something about bathrooms or some kid some boy showed up to school in a pink shirt. Like
Yeah.
this was. We don't want that to be publicly. They might end up put in prison behind some chromosome stuff. It was like
Wow.
AI freakouts. It was such a different end to the story than I thought it was going to be. That's 1974 for you. New York superhero George Steinbrenner III was fined by the Federal Elections Commission for improper donations related to the Senate campaign of Daniel Inouye. And this whole story made me so nostalgic.
Yeah. What for, Mike?
George Steinbrenner,
Sure.
and also campaign finance laws.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like we used to be a real country.
we did. We
You
did.
know what I mean?
Yep.
Like there was a lot of things wrong with Steinbrenner, but he was never boring.
That's true.
He was never boring, and that is
Yeah.
this like third or fourth worst thing you can possibly be.
Yep.
And finally, some bad news for the denizens of Second Avenue. The long-awaited Second Avenue subway line. They announced a bit of a delay on that day.
Oh no! The Second
Yeah, I
Avenue
know.
subway?
They were tacking at least 6 years on to the then current estimate of 1986 for a completion date. So we don't look ahead
close.
in this story. So I'm just going to
close.
assume
Yeah,
the New
sure.
York Second
yeah.
Avenue subway was finished in 1986, and
Yeah.
God bless them. So,
Yep.
say it with me. At least we never had to do that story again. All right,
Yes,
Jason.
indeed.
What did critics say about Young Frankenstein?
The New York Times' Vincent Canby called it, quote, a monster riot and Mel Brooks' funniest, most cohesive comedy to date. He wrote, although it hasn't as many roof-raising boffs as Blazing Saddles, Dave, I know we're always looking for words we're not using frequently in our reviews, so I guess we're going to start using boffs for laughs. It is funnier over the long run because it is, altogether now, more disciplined. The anarchy is controlled. Mr. Brooks sticks to the subject, recalling the cliches of horror films of the 1930s as lovingly as someone remembering the small sins of youth, end quote. Roger Ebert, my man, 4 out of 4 stars, raved, Young Frankenstein is as funny as we expect a Mel Brooks comedy to be, but it's more than that. It shows artistic growth and a more sure-handed control of the material by a director who once seemed willing to do literally anything for a laugh. It's more confident and less breathless. He continued, the movie is a send-up of a style and not just of the material, as Paul Morrissey's dreadful Andy Warhol's Frankenstein. It looks right, which makes it funnier. And then, paradoxically, it works on a couple of levels, first as a comedy, and then as a weirdly touching story in its own right. End quote. Pauline Kael also praised it as much as she praised this kind of movie. Quote, it's a silly zizzy picture, a farce parody of Hollywood's mad scientists trying to be God pictures, she wrote. It isn't a dialogue comedy. Yeah, I know, that's a good one too. It isn't a dialogue comedy. It's visceral and lower. It's what used to be called a crazy comedy, and there hasn't been this kind of craziness on the screen in years. It's a film to go to when your rhythm is slowed down and you're too tired to think. You can't bring anything to it. Brooks's timing is too obvious for that. You have to let it do everything for you because that's the only way it works. It has some of the obviousness of Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, and if you go expecting too much, it could seem like kids' stuff, which of course it is. But it's very funny kids stuff, the kind that made pictures like Kentucky Moonshine and Murder He Says into nut brain classics. You can go see it when you can barely keep your eyes open and come out feeling relaxed and recharged, end quote. In fact, the only even slightly negative review that I could find was John H. Doerr's in The Hollywood Reporter. Quote, the screenplay recognizably follows the basic Mary Shelley story using repetition skillfully to milk its jokes. It is good-natured, lowbrow, backlot, hit-or-miss humor, but with no cumulative effect beyond its succession of hard-worked jokes. More theatrical than cinematic in its conception, this group effort relies on the improvisation of its performers. Director Brooks executes several good jokes on horror movie style, but his film has no distinctive visual style of its own. End quote. What a weird criticism. This movie that is a spoof of other movies does not have a visual style of its own. All right.
So no Zizzy Boff for THR, but everybody else is on board.
Everybody else is on board with this
Noted.
crazy comedy. This loopy Zizzy Boff.
Do you see the writerly intelligence that was just put on exhibit here? This guy took these words, incorporated them into his lexicon, put them together, and put them all into a sentence that fit the. That's professional. That's
right.
Professional business, David. I just have to recognize. That's incredible.
I thought you were talking about John from the Hollywood Reporter.
Goodness
He also took a bunch of words and put them in order.
He did.
Let's
Yeah,
give him
but you
credit for
just hit
that.
us with a Zizzy Boff.
There you go.
I didn't even know either of those words 5 minutes ago, and you're already using them in context. I'm very impressed.
There
Yeah,
we
it's
go.
my favorite Hanson song, to be fair.
Mike, how did it do in terms of box office and awards?
It was, as I believe the industry jargon goes, a big-ass hit.
Yep.
Grossing $86 million and coming in third in the year's box office top 10. Behind only The Towering Inferno and, amazingly, Brooks and Wilder's previous picture, Blazing Saddles, which was released in February.
Yep.
Mel Brooks is still spinning 1974.
He sure is.
Basically what that means.
Yep.
Check out our 1974 episode of A Very Good Year with guest Kevin Cruz, where we talk about both of them. Here's the bigger surprise. That was a fun episode because it was about 1974. I mean, like, you could be asleep and make a good podcast about that year. Okay.
There you go.
Here's the bigger surprise. It was nominated for 2 Oscars.
All right.
What? Brooks and Wilder were nominated for Best Adapted Screenplay, losing to Godfather Part 2, which, we get it.
Sure.
Can I just ask Best Adapted? Like, adapted from
Mary Shelley's
I think of
Frankenstein.
that as like, but from like literally the novel is what.
Yeah.
Okay.
I
Wow.
think so.
Really?
I mean,
because there's so many spare parts that they're begging, borrowing, and stealing from all that entire kind of universal Frankenstein cycle. Like the joke where the guy, it's the town council, and he says, "We're still traumatized from the last 5 times." That's a direct reference to the early Frankenstein movies, and you can see bits of Ghost of Frankenstein in there, and bits of Bride of Frankenstein in there. But it was adapted. It was an adapted screenplay of the novel, according to the Academy.
I'm not sure if it technically was considered because it was adapted from the novel, or if it was just adapted from all of those things or what. But for whatever reason, it was considered an adapted screenplay. There are weird examples throughout Oscar history of things that really were adapted that were in for original or vice versa. And I don't know. That's where it was.
Dude, this is why, like, can you imagine learning something about Young Frankenstein in 2026?
There you
Lord
have
have
it.
mercy. Come on,
There
at my
you go.
age, I just learned a thing. That's amazing. Okay. So one Best Adapted. They were nominated for Best Adapted, but they lost to Godfather Part 2, right?
Sure.
Okay, fine.
Sure.
Fair enough.
Sure.
It was also nominated for Best Sound, but lost that prize to Earthquake, which, to be fair, had Sin Surround going for it.
It did. It sure
Low
did.
rumbles.
That's right.
Low rumbles. They
That's
should have
right.
put some rumbling footsteps with the monster.
There you
It
go.
also got 2 Golden Globe nominations. Madeline Kahn for Best Supporting Actress. Thank you. As well as, and this is weird, Cloris Leachman for Best Actress in a Comedy or Musical.
Right? That's fucking weird, right? But that's the Golden Globes, I guess.
Khan also got a nomination for Best Supporting Actress from the New York Film Critics Circle. Shout out.
Yeah.
And Brooks and Wilder's script got a nomination at the WGA Awards.
Yep.
But once again, only the genre awards really know what's up.
Yep.
It won the Nebula Award from Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America for Best Dramatic Writing, the Hugo Award for Best Dramatic Presentation, and Golden Scroll Awards from the Academy of Science Fiction, Fantasy, and Horror Films for Best Horror Film, Best Director for Brooks, Best Supporting Actor for Marty Feldman, Best Makeup, and Best Set Decoration. They cleaned up at that thing I've never heard of. So once again,
Golden Scroll Awards. Kudos.
hats off to the genre guys, as
There
always and
There we go.
forever.
Here, here. All right, now it's time for a segment we call Double It Up, where we each select one movie that we think would make an ideal double feature for today's focal film. David Fear, you're our guest, which means you go first. What are you pairing it with?
Yeah, the no-brainer is to pair it with Blazing Saddles, but I don't think
Sure.
that's fair to either film. So I would pair it with The Bride of Frankenstein. I wouldn't even go with the original Frankenstein. I would go with The Bride of Frankenstein, which is a film that I think is a little bit superior, but it also
It is.
it gives you a better idea, I think, of what they're parroting actually than
Yes.
the first film. And I love the fact of like somebody either watching Young Frankenstein and then watching Bride of Frankenstein and understanding how deft those parodies were that Mel Brooks and his collaborators were creating, or watching Bride of Frankenstein first and then being like, wow, what an amazing, Hollywood Gothic, Universal monster movie, horror film, and then going straight into Young Frankenstein and just getting the kind of comic flip side of that.
I agree. No, I think if you do it the latter way, then you certainly get a huge laugh when Madeline Kahn comes on with the hair. That's a big payoff. This one is a little obvious, especially since Ms. Kale mentioned it. I will say after I decided that this was going to be my pick, but Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. Like, you're really getting. I thought about it. I sort of reaffirmed to myself that it was the right choice, Dave, when you said the thing you said earlier about the sort of the brilliance of the comedy existing within the stylistic trappings of the period. Like, the thing that's great about Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein is that it does look and feel like a Universal horror movie, because they were making it at Universal with all the same team around. They had, a lot of the same actors who were popping up in these. That piece of it is terrific, and the deftness with which it mixes satire with straight horror. The other thing that I always think about when I think of Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, to mention someone we mentioned earlier, is, I read something that Quentin Tarantino said about Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein years ago that always sticks with me when I think of that film, which is that he said that movie was an eye-opening experience for him when he saw it at, 10 or 11 years old, which was probably around when I saw it. The idea that it's hilariously funny, but the scary parts are genuinely scary. Like, the Frankenstein monster is really menacing. Dracula is creepy in the same way he's creepy in a Dracula movie. And I think a lot of the horror spoofs, especially of these characters, play them as ridiculous, play them as caricatures, play them as not genuinely actually threatening, lest they curb the horror or whatever. But the fact that they take them seriously as monsters makes Abbott and Costello's reactions to them more potent. Tarantino said it was an important movie for him because it was one of the first movies that made him realize how much you could mix genres and mix tones within the same movie, which is, of course, sort of instrumental to his entire fucking deal.
Yeah, I don't think you get an American Werewolf in London without Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Great comparison. Yes. All right, Mike, what's your pick, buddy?
Well, those are both very good picks.
Thank you.
But I'm going to assume that there's at least 2 or 3 people in our audience who've already done those doubles, right?
Sure.
I mean, who've seen those movies and sort of are conscious of what we're doing here. And if you haven't,
Absolutely.
for God's sake, stop listening to me. Go watch Bride of Frankenstein. It's great. Okay, but when I was thinking about this, I was trying to think about what movie would I recommend to Mel Brooks. which is not necessarily like an obvious double
Sure.
with this movie necessarily, but I'm just telling you this, even if
Sure.
you don't think these two movies go together, that was my criteria. If I was trying to make Mel Brooks laugh, what movie would I tell him to go watch? Or like what movie would I think that, what modern movie do I think would make him laugh? Did you guys see Butt Boy?
Go on.
I did see Butt Boy. Yes. Yes, I did. I sure did. Mike, you want to give
Somebody
Dave
smarter than me who I
the plot
respect a lot.
summary for Butt Boy?
Sure. So it's exactly what you think it is. Only then it's so much more. In the first 10 minutes, it's exactly what you think it is. You know, there's a guy, he goes to the doctor, he gets a proctology exam, and then later he's sleeping with his wife, and he tries to get her to, you know, sort of involve that in their situation. She's grossed out, doesn't want to do it. From there, he starts exploring it on his own. So
Sorry,
this all happens.
What year is this? Like 1939, 1940? What
This is
Golden Age of Hollywood stuff here we're talking about?
This is a 2020. This is a pandemic movie, which might be why you missed it upon its initial release, Dave.
This is the thing about this movie. It is genuinely funny. I've seen it more than once now. I'm just gonna say. And once I realized it was a comedy, you know, the second time it was much fun. It was even funnier. The movie is genuinely funny, but also I had no idea. Everywhere it went, I had no idea it was going to go there. How often does that happen? How often do you see a movie where you genuinely don't know where it's going to go? But then when it goes there, you're satisfied. Usually, if I don't know where you're going to go, it's because you're going somewhere so dumb. I wouldn't even want to have had that idea, right?
Sure.
So
but in this case, please.
Let me make sure I got this straight, Michael. So you're talking about a movie in which you just show up dutifully to go see it. Something happens to you while you're seeing it. You suddenly realize that this is a pleasurable experience, and then you want to keep replicating it over and over and over again. I'm really sensing a form meets content kind of relationship here with this film.
Sure. Yeah, that scans.
Yeah, I think that's right. Now I've watched it several times, and I keep.
And you're trying to get your wife to watch
watching
it for you. Yeah.
Dave Fear, where can people follow you on social media and read your work?
I post on Blue Sky, but I have to admit I've given up the failed experiment that is social media, more or less. But I'll post stuff on Blue Sky, and then the best place to find my work is I've got a writer's page on the Rolling Stone website, and it's just filled with miscellaneous debris and rants and ravings and an occasional turn of phrase about every 32 pieces.
And there we have it. I'm Jason Bailey on Blue Sky
It's a
and
great
Letterboxd.
page. Highly recommended.
There we go.
Highly recommended.
I'm Jason Bailey on Blue Sky and Letterboxd. Mike, where can people find you?
I am Michael Hull on what's that movie site called?
Letterboxd. Yeah.
Where I have a review of Butt Boy.
I'm sure you do. If not, more than one.
Best marketing you could have given Letterboxd right now, to be perfectly honest.
And of course, if you like the show and you think other people might like it too, please do leave us a rating and or review on your podcatcher of choice. If you'd like to join our mailing list and get all of our weekly show notes and all that jazz, you can do it at buttondown.email/filmfanatic. If you'd like to make a donation to support us in the show, you can do that at ko-fi.com/funcitysounds. And if you are one of the very strange people who likes to watch a video of people recording a podcast that's intended for you to listen to, hello, find us on YouTube. Our channel is Guide for the Film Fanatic.
Our humblest thanks to our guiding light, Mr. Danny Perry, author of Guide for the Film Fanatic. And shout out to executive producer Blake Howard, who in addition to his charming demeanor, delightful accent, and general warmth, has, by all accounts, an enormous Schwanstucker.
Thank you again, Dave.
I love it that Blake is the best giver of compliments that I've ever
Yep.
met in my entire life, and you just paid him back in full, Michael.
There we go. Thank you again, Dave Fear.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Jason.
And thank you for listening. On the next Guide for the Film Fanatic, Pop Culture Happy Hour co-host Aisha Harris joins us to discuss the lusty teens of Splendor in the Grass. Don't miss it.